So let me define some of the terms for benchmarking. What are the standards? So let's start at the low level. So unacceptable practices, practices that leave you exposed, that are risky, that are way too costly, that are inappropriate for your organization. We consider those unacceptable. The minimum standard that would be used would be termed the standard of good corporate conduct. What is the minimum standard that really any company over $100 million in annual sales should use for payables, for debt management, for managing their payments, tracking and gaining visibility to their accounts? What's the minimum standard? We call that the standard of good corporate conduct. Above that would be leading practices. What is an optimal or a very high level standard that would be considered a leader for your type of organization, your size organization? Then above that, we would have world class. World class would be the highest level standard for maybe some of the largest companies or the companies with the most activity, or their treasury intensity in a particular area is great. They have tremendous exposure to commodity price fluctuation. They make 10 million payments a month. So any of these areas where treasury intensity comes into play, world-class practice would be seen as perhaps fairly expensive, but worthwhile, and considered the top of class in the world. Leading practice would be the best in the industry, or for your type of organization, it's a calibrated response, hitting that level. And every organization needs to determine, what is our approach going to be? Are we looking to reach the minimum standard, or are we looking to be a leading practice in certain areas? Are we looking to be world-class in other areas of our business management? Here's a couple perspectives on benchmarking that everyone needs to keep in mind. One is that the level or the standard can be different for different companies. Certainly, the standard of good corporate conduct for most companies, once they reach 100 million or more in sales, there's going to be a minimum standard. That's going to be pretty similar for most organizations, but they're going to be different. The standards are going to differ for different companies. Organizations that are very treasury intensive will have different standards for the minimum standard, for leading practices, etc. So someone making 10 million payments a month is going to have a different standard for a world-class practice, a leading practice, or standard of good corporate conduct than maybe a manufacturer is making 2,000 payments a month. So organizations that are very treasury intensive in payments, in financial risk management with commodities or FX, or if they're operating in an enormously large number of countries, or have a very diverse customer base or supplier base, each of these represents treasury intensity, and the standards can differ for these different companies. And so therefore, benchmarks need to be compared against relevant companies, and the proper standard can come from that. The second part about benchmarking and perspectives is that standards change over time. We don't need to look much further than the level of fraud that's been occurring to recognize that standards of control have to be adjusted. Standards of protection and security must change. The level of loss has been great, so what was acceptable 10 years ago didn't work 5 years ago, and certainly doesn't work today. So we can expect to see, and you can look at the chart on the screen, you can see how that standard of good corporate conduct, leading practice, and world-class practices will change and adapt over time to take advantage of technology, the environment, the level of risk, and organizations' willingness to set a particular pace and standard. So when we think about benchmarking, really in the context of comparisons, what are others doing and what should we be doing are two key questions that treasurers want to know the answer to. It helps you understand if you're doing too much, too little, what the risks are, and performing benchmarking and comparisons to what you should be doing every couple of years makes immense sense for organizations. We do a number of Treasury surveys asking operational questions, risk questions, different types of elements. So we gather a significant amount of data and can incorporate this into benchmarks, as well as bringing to bear insight into what particular organization should be doing if they're targeting the minimum standard of good corporate conduct, leading practices, or world-class practices.